This one has some unbelievable stories in it. Coming up, we're going all in on the most unlikely origin stories of some of those legendary bands and artists ever. I think you're going to dig this one. It's cool. Including a grieving drummer whose famous band had just splintered in tragedy. He left music for a time, but then out of the blue, he secretly recorded a solo album in just 1 week. He played every instrument himself. And then he made up a fake band name because he didn't want anyone to know who he was. He became one of the biggest acts in rock. Then there's the story of the band leader who found his guitarist in an unforgettable classified ad. But it turns out he'd already met him before, and he even had his number. He'd just forgotten all about it. The band would become one of the biggest acts of the 80s and beyond. Plus the singer who was hired by one of the biggest jerks in history to sing lead on a legendary song. The song went to #1, but it was credited to another band altogether, even though she was the voice behind it and the other band didn't play on it. Even today, people still don't know that she sang this song. Let's do it. Hey, music junkies, make sure to get your Vintage Years collection shirt either here or down below. We got a special deal running through the holidays. I think you'll really love it. We celebrate the great years of music by artist Thomas Estrada. You know, if comic book movies are any indication, everyone loves the origin story. Well, today we give you the greatest origin stories in rock history. Kickstarting a countdown at number 7, I've got the origins of the Everly Brothers.
I'm gonna cry. Bye bye, love.
And to start, I got to introduce their father, Ike Everly. Ike was widely regarded as one of the greatest country guitarists of all time, and music ran deep in the Everly family from the beginning. By the mid-40s, Ike, his wife Margaret, and their 2 sons, Don and Phil Everly, were playing radio shows in the Midwest, moving between radio stations where Ike would land a job. As the boys started to get older, they joined him on stage, though. Margaret was more of a manager, not a performer, but she kept the family operation running smoothly. Don got so good that he was given his own 15-minute show, performing as Little Donnie, while also appearing with the rest of the family. The Everlys would perform their show live first thing in the morning, though. 5 a.m. to be exact, since they were playing country music for farmers, and they were always early risers. After the show finished, the young boys would head off to school, and it was still dark. They'd head still in the dark. The radio show, it continued for years, and Don and Phil developed all sorts of tricks for keeping an audience entertained. Skills that would later serve them well. But by 1955, there was much less of a market for live music on the radio. It was cheaper for stations to employ DJs to play records, and the Everly family show came to an end. Now they didn't even have DJs. So both Ike and Margaret got jobs cutting hair while encouraging their sons to pursue music full-time. After a few months, Margaret decided to move the boys to Nashville to try to get him a record deal, while Ike remained in nearby Knoxville working as a barber. One of Ike's haircutting clients happened to be songwriter Boudleaux Bryant. Ike asked Bryant if he had any songs that his songs could record. Bryant had one. It was called Bye Bye Love, but it had been rejected more than 30 times. So, he offered it to Don and Phil Everly, figuring, it can't hurt.
Hello, emptiness. I feel like I could die.
Cadence Records signed the Everly Brothers as country artists, but here's where fate intervened. The shipping department made a huge mistake, and they sent the so-called country records to rock and roll radio stations instead of country stations. So Bye Bye Love started getting played on rock and roll radio, not country. But when they figured out what happened, Cadence Records wasn't convinced that they could market it to rock and roll stations, so they decided to promote it as country and just take their chances in the rock and roll genre. Bye Bye Love, it became the Everly Brothers' breakthrough hit, released just weeks after the session in late March 1957. Now, success pretty much happened overnight, and it happened on both charts. The song first debuted on Billboard's country singles chart on May 13, 1957, and it began a steady climb. And then 2 weeks later, it showed up on the rock charts. Bye Bye Love reached the top of the country charts on June 22nd. It held the #1 position for 7 weeks. It nearly replicated that success on the Billboard singles chart, peaking at #2, where it stayed for 4 weeks. Don and Phil's very country-sounding rock song had become a major crossover hit. It was their first of many million sellers. And they became a rock and roll act.
My love, goodbye. Bye bye, my love, goodbye.
All right, coming in at number 6, I've got one that's a real firecracker. I've got Sex Pistols and how they came together. Now, formed in 1976, the Pistols came together when a politically radical fashion designer named Malcolm McLaren set out to do something truly audacious. He wanted to create a band designed to incite chaos and provoke controversy. Calling Carter rock and roll. Initially known as the Swankers, the group consisted of working-class teenagers with spiky hair, torn clothes, and a disdain for authority. Qualities that Malcolm deliberately cultivated to shock the world and turn rebellion into a tangible commodity. The core lineup included guitarist Steve Jones, drummer Paul Cook, bassist Glenn Matlock, and early vocalist Wally Nightingale. They met and rehearsed irregularly in London. They played small gigs, and it quickly became synonymous with mayhem, right? But everything changed when McLaren recruited a sneering, confrontational young man named John Lydon in 1975. Revolutionary here. He renamed him Johnny Rotten, of course, and he found the perfect frontman to capture the band's sound and attitude. By 1976, they solidified themselves as Sex Pistols, and London would never be the same. Their debut single, Anarchy in the UK, dropped in November of '76 on EMI Records. Of course, opening with Rotten's infamous cackle, the track crystallized their anti-establishment fury in just under 4 minutes. The band is signed with EMI, one of Britain's most prestigious labels, but that relationship wouldn't last very long. The big revelation came in December of '76 when the Pistols appeared on Bill Grundy's live television show, and what happened next became the first major punk rock scandal. Goaded by the host, the band unleashed a profanity-laced tirade on national television. The interview ignited a nationwide moral panic with newspapers screaming headlines and parents clutching their pearls.
Well, I'm saying nothing else about him. We'll be back tomorrow. I'll be seeing you soon. I hope I'm not seeing you again.
EMI dropped the band almost immediately, but the damage, or depending on your perspective, the publicity, was done. Within months of their first proper shows, the Sex Pistols had clocked in their status as Britain's most dangerous band. But really, Malcolm McLaren and the Pistols, they were just getting started. In May of 1977, during Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee celebrations, they released God Save the Queen. This was on Virgin Records. Johnny Rotten's savage anti-monarchy lyrics, "She ain't no human being, there's no future in England's dreaming," that triggered nationwide outrage. The BBC and most radio stations banned it outright. Shops refused to even stock it. Politicians condemned it. And it still sold 200,000 copies in 1 week. The band celebrated by performing the song on a boat cruising down the Thames River, prompting police raids and arrests. It became the most censored record in British history, and to this day, God Save the Queen remains Britain's most infamous single. But looking back, it's clear that Malcolm McLaren got exactly what he wanted. He set out to create chaos and controversy, and the Pistols delivered in spectacular fashion. People are still talking about it. This band was a cultural earthquake, a big middle finger to polite society and the spark that ignited punk rock across the globe. Love them or hate them, they were impossible to ignore, which of course was the whole point. All right, coming in at number 5, we're switching gears to tell the story of Darlene Wright, who became Darlene Love. And you're not going to believe this one. The story starts where so many great voices do, at church. As the daughter of a minister, Darlene's first musical experience was singing in the choir. Shortly after her 16th birthday, Darlene Wright and her family joined St. Paul Baptist Church, where she quickly became a standout voice. Now, during one choir practice, her singing caught the attention of choir director Cora Martin. After hearing Darlene sing, Martin asked her to come down to the Music Mart, where they did broadcast, to perform a few songs. And that's where Darlene really got going. And then one day, a girl Darlene knew from church, Dolores Ferguson, asked her to sing at her wedding. But what Darlene didn't know, that the wedding, it was actually an audition. Dolores' bridal party included her friends Gloria Jones, Fanita Barrett, and Annette and Nanette Williams. They had a singing group that was called the Blossoms. And they were looking to replace Annette, who was pregnant. Darlene passed the test with flying colors, because after the ceremony, she was introduced to the girls and asked to do an official audition at their manager Eddie Bill's office. And though her parents initially refused to let her join after meeting the Blossoms, they actually did change their mind. In 1958, Darlene Wright officially became part of the group. Now, the Blossoms recorded as a quartet for Capitol Records from 1958 to 1960, but they didn't have a lot of success. They then transitioned to a trio for Challenge and another record company. But they quickly found their niche as one of those in-demand backup groups in LA, supporting artists like Bobby Boris Pickett on Monster Mash, and James Darren on Goodbye Cruel World, and Bobby Day on Rockin' Robin. They were singing backups for all those.
They played the Monster Mash.
The Monster Mash.
Clown out of me. Rockin' Robin.
The group kept a busy schedule in the studio, and their harmonies became essential to countless hits. But then in 1962, everything changed. Or at least it was supposed to. Producer and resident scumbag Phil Spector was looking for a lead singer for He's a Rebel, which had already been recorded by singer Vicky Carr, but it hadn't been released. Phil Spector was anxious to get his version out first, though. He wanted the group The Crystals to record it. However, they were out on tour, so he gave the song to the Blossoms with Darlene, who was just 18, and she was singing lead vocals. She nailed it. And get this, Phil Spector released it under the Crystals' name anyway. Talk about shady. When Darlene was asked if she knew about that arrangement, she did admit that she knew about it. She said, "So what, the man just paid me triple scale." That's how it was back then. Darlene figured it was a cute song, but probably wouldn't go anywhere. Well, she couldn't have been more wrong. He's a Rebel became a classic. It went all the way to number one. It was a smash. But the Blossoms received absolutely no recognition and absolutely no royalties. All the credit went to the Crystals and, of course, Phil Spector. He decided the record would be more marketable that way since the Crystals had already had a couple of hits, and he made most of the money, of course. Darlene Love went on to become part of Phil Spector's legendary Wall of Sound, though, in the early 60s, singing on hits like the Do Ron Ron and the holiday classic Christmas Baby Please Come Home. As a member of the Blossoms, though, she provided background vocals for everybody from Marvin Gaye and Dionne Warwick to Elvis Presley and the Righteous Brothers. But for years, Darlene Love would struggle financially. She even had to clean houses to make ends meet. It would be decades before her voice was finally recognized and finally celebrated for the powerhouse it truly was, including her awesome Christmas performances on David Letterman. Man, what a crazy origin story. She sang a number one hit, and it was credited to somebody else. Yeah, it's rough. All right, coming in at number 4 spot, the origin story of Motley Crue. In 1980, bassist Nikki Sixx walked away from his band London with a vision to form a new group that would blow the roof off the LA music scene. He teamed up with drummer Tommy Lee from Sweet Nine, and together they recruited guitarist Greg Leon. However, Greg quit immediately, leaving Sixx and Lee desperate for a guitarist. Now, this was back in the day before the internet or social media, of course, so you had to network old school. So they thumbed through the LA classifieds, and as they did, they came across an ad that sounded perfect to their ears. It simply read, "Loud, rude, and aggressive guitar player available." It had been placed by Bob Mick Mars Deal. Now, what Sixx didn't realize when he saw that ad was that they'd actually met before. Mars was playing with a band called White Horse back then, and one night at a gig, he took one look at the $2 tequila shots and thought, no way. So I actually walked down the street to Magnolia Liquors to grab something cheaper. Working the register was a young Nikki Sixx, strung out and already a few drinks deep. Mars clocked Sixx's look, total rocker, and then he struck up a conversation. Now, when Sixx rattled off his favorite bands and mentioned Kiss, Mars checked out. He just couldn't stand them. But being a nice guy, he threw out an invite telling Nikki to swing by his show and catch his band. Now, when Sixx finished his shift, he went to check out the show and he arrived just as Mick was playing a solo using a mic stand as a slide. He was mesmerized, and after the show, the two talked and they exchanged numbers. Nothing ever came of it, though. Not until this random ad. Little did he know he was about to meet him again. Mick was, of course, hired on the spot. So with bass, guitar, and drums locked down, the group invited a singer simply named Odin to front the band. But after cutting one demo with him, he was sacked in exchange for a singer that Tommy Lee knew from high school. The platinum blonde Vince Neil was singing in a band called Rock Candy, and after watching him perform, the three knew they'd found their guy. But at first, Neil just wasn't interested, so Tommy Lee kept trying to persuade him to audition. Finally, Neil said that his band had screwed him over, and he agreed to give it a go. So Vince showed up, I believe it was April 1st, 1981, and he showed up with this girl that the rest of the guys called Lovey. And she proceeded to evaluate if the band was the right fit for Neil. In her opinion, they weren't, but Neil joined anyway. Just minutes into the rehearsal, Nikki was rewriting lyrics to suit his new singer's voice. And the first song that came together was Live Wire, and it became the opening track on their debut record, Too Fast for Love. The band signed to Elektra Records in 1982, and the album was remixed and reissued that August. The following year, they recorded a new set, Shout at the Devil, with producer Tom Werman. Released in September of 1983, Shout at the Devil became the band's breakthrough, establishing the Crue as one of the top-selling heavy metal acts of the 80s. I mean, they went from a classified ad to chart domination in about 2.5 years. And they kind of met by accident before. They forgot about it until they didn't. All right, heading into the number 3 spot, I got a really crazy story for you. The Flaming Lips and the story of their lead singer, Wayne Coyne. And man, this one, seriously, hard to believe. So get this, in 1977, Wayne Coyne was a teenager working as a fry cook at Long John Silver's in Oklahoma City. It's a job he had for over a decade, until the early 90s. But during his second year there, the restaurant would be robbed multiple times. Now, during one of those robberies, Wayne experienced a life-changing moment when he was held at, GUN point. I can't say the word because of YouTube. The criminals forced him to lie down on the floor, face down. In that moment, Wayne was convinced his life was about to end. When the robbers finally left and Coyne realized he was still alive, he was overwhelmed with relief. He would later say, and I quote, "This is really how you die. One minute you're just cooking up someone's order of French fries, and the next minute you're lying on the floor and they offer you. There's no music, there's no significance, it's just random." But this brush with mortality was enough to inspire him to chase his dreams. Wayne had already started playing music during his high school days, and by the early 80s, he'd formed the Flaming Lips with his brother Mark, and also bassist Michael Ivins, and a rotating cast of drummers. Now, Mark is best remembered for his vocals on the debut albums My Own Planet, but he didn't stick around long. After his brother's departure, though, Wayne took over lead vocals, and he became the band's driving creative force. The Flaming Lips would release their first album in 1986. Another came in 1987, and then in 1989, they dropped Telepathic Surgery. In 1990, they put out their next album, In a Priest-Driven Ambulance. All 4 albums happened while Wayne Coyne was still working as a fry cook at Long John Silver's. The man was balancing his day job at a seafood restaurant and moonlighting as a musician, recording albums and touring whenever he could fit it in. The Flaming Lips finally signed a recording contract with Warner Brothers, and their first major label album hit in 1992, of course called Hit to Death and The Future Head. This gave Wayne Coyne enough financial security to quit the food industry and focus exclusively on the music. It's no coincidence that the interest for the band came in the early 90s alternative explosion. Record labels were hunting for the next Nirvana. But going big and becoming popular, that was never on Wayne's radar. Said Coyne, "By the time it really happened, Long John Silver's was such a big part of me. I didn't like leaving it. I liked the escape of it. I'm really just one of those people working at a restaurant. You're like, I don't know if this could ever happen for us. I wouldn't even know what's popular." Now, luckily, what we were doing accidentally looked like what was happening in popular music at the time. It's cool. I mean, after doing thousands of these shows, is everything just a happy accident in life? So by 1993, the Flaming Lips began gaining momentum. And their song, She Don't Use Jelly, that took off on MTV over the following year. It hit number 55 on the Billboard Hot 100, but hit number 9 on the US alternative charts.
She don't use jelly or any of these.
That would pretty much be their only US singles chart success, but it was enough to keep Wayne from having to go back to Long John Silver's. Now, to date, though, the Flaming Lips have released 16 albums, and they've been an indie fixture for decades. Great band. All right, so we made it to the bridesmaid position, number 2, and for this one, I've got the formation of one of the biggest rock acts in the world today. And they have been for decades. Talking about Foo Fighters. This story really is the stuff of rock legend, though. It begins with Kurt Cobain's death in April of '94. Nirvana was, of course, one of the most influential bands in rock history, whether they wanted to be or not. With Kurt's passing, everything turned upside down for the band's drummer, Dave Grohl. It was a heavyweight punch to the gut, one that Dave thought he'd never recover from. For the better part of a year, he wanted nothing to do with music. He found himself adrift. Over the course of that self-imposed sabbatical, though, the sabbatical for music, Grohl was invited to join several prominent bands, including, a lot of people don't know this, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Despite joining them on stage for a performance on Saturday Night Live, Dave said, "Thank you, but no thank you." By 1994, though, actually October of '94, Dave Grohl came to the realization that music was the healing force that he needed in his life. So he secretly booked time at Robert Lang Studios in Seattle. Now, he wasn't ready to admit to himself yet, but he was a talented songwriter. Over the past 4 or 5 years, he had quietly composed a stockpile of incredible songs. But since Kurt was such a larger-than-life lyricist, he didn't want to bring them forward to Nirvana to use. But now he was at a point where he had to get this music out, even if it was just for himself. So Dave collected his favorites and recorded them at a 24-track studio down the street from his house. Said Grohl, and I quote, "It was exciting because I was doing it totally by myself. I didn't know why I was doing it. I just wanted to do something. So I booked a week at the studio, and at the end of the week, I had a cassette, and it sounded good." A multi-instrumental perfectionist, Dave Grohl played everything on that album. He played the drums, he played the bass, the guitar, he sang the vocals, everything. He hired a friend, a guy named Barrett Jones, to produce and to assist with that recording. So this demo tape became the foundation of the first Foo Fighters album. After finishing the recordings, Dave Grohl didn't want anyone to know it was just him, though. So after finding the World War II term Foo Fighters in a book about UFOs, he turned this one-man band into a fictional multi-person group. Grohl just wanted the name to sound like a group of people, not a solo project. He later admitted he thought Foo Fighters was a stupid name, and if he'd known the band would blow up like it did, he'd have chosen something completely different. I think he's wrong. I think Foo Fighters is awesome, but Grohl initially made only 100 cassette copies of the finished tape, distributing them anonymously to friends and colleagues. There was Eddie Vedder of Pearl Jam and Chris Novoselic, of course, Nirvana's bassist. But here's the thing. The tapes generated massive buzz around Seattle. This led to Grohl signing with Capitol Records. He famously insisted on a contract clause that allowed him to walk away if he became uncomfortable with that sudden pressure. And then he quickly assembled a band to tour and promote that debut album. Actually, former Nirvana guitarist Pat Smear came aboard from there. Then there was bassist Nate Mendel, drummer William Goldsmith. They both previously held from the Seattle band Sunny Day Real Estate. Their debut single, This Is a Call, that was released in June of '95, followed by the full album Foo Fighters. The LP produced 3 top 10 alternative hits, which besides This Is a Call included I'll Stick Around and Big Me, of course. The album sold 1.5 million copies in the US. 30 years later, Foo Fighters have released 11 studio albums and sold over 32 million albums worldwide. And they also have over 40 top 25 alternative rock singles to the name, one of the biggest bands of the last 30 years. All right, I had to throw in an honorable mention for one of my favorite bands. Great origin story, R.E.M. In 1980, guitarist Peter Buck was working behind the counter at Wuxtry Records in Athens, Georgia, when an art student named Michael Stipe walked in as a customer. Now, the two hit it off when they discovered they had identical musical tastes. Michael Stipe later said, "It turns out that I was buying all the records that Peter Buck was saving for himself." They shared a passion for punk rock and both lived in an abandoned Episcopal church. The church had been converted into a chaotic student commune. Buck and Stipe started a band recruiting bassist Mike Mills and drummer Bill Berry. And on April 5th, 1980, a massive house party at this derelict church promised 3 live bands and free beer. Two local acts warmed up the crowd before the unnamed final band took the stage. Buck, Stipe, Mills, and Barry were so new, they didn't even have a name yet. They tore through 60s covers and originals with infectious energy. They were a massive hit. I'll bet you no one in that crowd realized they were listening to one of the greatest American bands ever. Until later.
Spotlight, losing my religion. But a man on the moon, man on the moon. Don't go back to Rockville.
All right, we've made it all the way to number 1 on the origin story countdown. These are better than the comic book origins, a lot of them. For this one, we're taking a look behind the dark sunglasses and telling the story of really one of the greatest vocalists ever, Roy Orbison.
Only the lonely.
Roy Orbison started out as a reluctant rockabilly singer in the 50s, working with legendary producers Norman Petty and Sam Phillips. But early on, he knew he wanted to be a songwriter. After moving to Nashville, he became a staff writer for Acuff Rose Music, and one of his first successes came with the Everly Brothers recording Claudette, a song he, of course, written for his wife. The royalties from that hit gave Orbison enough money to buy himself out of his contract with Sun Records, and he signed with the Small Monument label.
Little pet Claudette, never make me fret, Claudette.
Although his plan was to still be a songwriter, Orbison found himself glancing the U.S. charts in 1960 with Uptown. A few months later, he wrote a song called Only the Lonely. He knew it would be perfect for the king, Elvis Presley. So, of course, Roy drove to Memphis to hand-deliver it to him because they knew each other well enough. When he arrived, though, Elvis was taking a nap. He was asleep. Roy is informed that the king wouldn't be waking up for several hours. So instead of waiting around, Roy drove a few hours to Nashville to offer the song to the Everly Brothers. Can you imagine? The same day you're giving it to Elvis and the Everly Brothers. As it turns out, though, they already had all the songs they needed for their new album. And the pivotal moment happened at this point. Don Everly suggested that Roy should record the song himself. And then he convinced him. That was one of the best suggestions anyone ever gave to anyone. The result was a sensation. The song topped the UK charts and narrowly missed the number 1 spot in the US. But man, that opening. It helped shape one of the most distinctive pop songs ever recorded. Over the next 5 years, Roy Orbison enjoyed unprecedented success in Britain and America, repeating his formula with further stylish but melancholy ballads, including Blue Angel, Running Scared, Crying, one of the best vocal performances ever, Dream Baby, Blue Bayou, and In Dreams.
Blue angel. Running scared. That won't do. Dream, baby, make me stop my dreaming. Come walk me to Blue Bayou. In dreams.
Roy became the master of the epic ballad of doom-laden despair, possessing a voice of remarkable range and power. He was Elvis's favorite singer, for hell's sake. Even during the British invasion, when the Beatles took over America, he was one of the few American artists to retain his ground commercially. In 1964, Orbison had 2 U.S. top 10 Hot 100 singles. The number 9 is Over, and the oh-so-hypnotic Oh Pretty Woman. Of course, that was a number 1 hit.
It's over. Pretty woman.
But I'm going to give you a 2 for 1 here with Roy Orbison. Did you know the story behind those iconic sunglasses? Okay, so Roy actually began wearing his trademark dark glasses completely by accident. So in 1963, before a UK tour with the Beatles, Roy Orbison accidentally left his regular prescription glasses on his plane. All he had with him was a pair of prescription sunglasses. Roy absolutely could not see clearly without those corrective lenses, so he just had no choice. He had to wear the dark glasses on stage and for his publicity photos. It created this unforgettable image that quickly became part of his mystique. And then when fans and the media embraced that cool, mysterious look, Roy decided to continue to wear the dark prescription glasses. And he did it for the rest of his career. And again, I think I've told the story before, but man, he used to open for the Beatles and they hated every second of it because How could you follow that? I just love that. Roy Orbison has a lot of great stories behind him. It's like when he was in the Traveling Wilburys, they were all fanboying about him. You know, Tom Petty, Bob Dylan, George Harrison, Jeff Lynne. Every time he would sing any part, they would stop everything they were doing and go watch Roy sing. They were just fanboying like crazy, like, oh, Roy, you're so great. Like, and of course, Roy Orbison, my dad always said, the greatest voice that's ever been recorded. I'd argue Frank Sinatra, but I'm right there with you, Dad.
Won't you show me that you really care?
All right, there's our top 7 origin stories. There's plenty more. So many great origin stories in rock, man. So many great, rich stories. Let's have a great discussion and celebrate these below. What do you think is the great origin story? What are your memories of these songs and these artists? Let's have a great discussion. If you like our content, we'd love to have you as a subscriber. Make sure to hit that button. Make sure to get your vintage ears. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.